The rain fell like the sky was tired of holding back its grief. Naomi sat behind the counter of the small diner, tracing circles on the empty coffee pot, pretending not to notice the final eviction notice tucked beneath her register. She had worked a double shift, yet her tips couldn't cover even half of what she owed. Across the street, a man stood under a flickering streetlight, staring at nothing. His clothes were clean but tired, his eyes sharper than they should have been for someone that lost. For one suspended moment, they looked at each other through the glass. Two strangers carrying the same silence. Naomi's son slept in the back booth, small hand curled around a worn crayon. The man turned away, but not before the soft ache in his gaze mirrored her own. She didn't know his name, and he didn't know her story, but something in the quiet between thunder and breath whispered that their broken pieces recognized each other. The next morning, Naomi woke to sunlight crawling across her small apartment floor, the kind of light that pretended everything was fine. Bills covered the kitchen table like fallen leaves, and Jalen hummed softly as he packed his worn backpack. She smiled, even if it hurt to pretend. She promised herself today would be better, that she'd find a way to keep the roof over their heads. Down the hall, the sound of laughter from a neighbor's home felt like another life. Naomi tied her apron tighter, kissed Jalen's forehead, and whispered that tomorrow would be brighter. She didn't know how true that whisper might soon become. Malcolm sat in his old sedan outside the diner, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back wasn't the one who once stood on magazine covers. That man had lost his way in numbers, power, and pride. He gripped the steering wheel and laughed bitterly. Everything he'd built was gone, and yet he was still breathing. Somewhere deep inside, that felt like a second chance, though he didn't know what to do with it. Naomi balanced two plates on her arm, smile practiced but fading at the edges. The diner buzzed with the lunch crowd, but her mind wandered to overdue rent and unpaid utilities. When she turned, a familiar face stopped her. The man from last night. He sat quietly in the corner booth. No laptop, no phone, just coffee. Their eyes met again, and something unspoken passed. Recognition, maybe, or the start of something neither dared name. By evening, the rain returned. Naomi watched from the doorway as the storm blurred the city lights into streaks of gold and gray. She thought of the man who'd sat silently at her booth, and wondered why his eyes looked like someone who'd lost everything. Somewhere deep inside, she understood that look, because she wore it too. The morning rush hummed through the diner, silverware clinking like small reminders of normal life. Naomi wiped a table near the window, her hands moving faster than her thoughts. The man from yesterday, Malcolm, sat in the same booth again. Only this time he smiled faintly when she passed. It wasn't the confident grin of a man used to winning. It was something gentler, uncertain, like a man relearning how to belong somewhere. When he left, she noticed a folded napkin beneath the coffee mug. Inside was a note written in clean, careful handwriting. For the coffee, and for the courage I saw in your eyes. 2 $20 bills were tucked inside. Her chest tightened, not from the money, but from the strange kindness of a stranger who somehow saw her when she felt invisible. Naomi didn't know whether to feel insulted or grateful. Pride and exhaustion tangled inside her chest. By the time her shift ended, she found herself standing outside the diner, staring at the street like it held answers. A black sedan pulled up, window rolling down slowly. Malcolm leaned out, hesitant, offering her a ride home. She wanted to say no, to protect the small wall she'd built between herself and disappointment. But something in his eyes told her he wasn't a man trying to save her. He was trying to understand her. Against her better judgment, she nodded, and silence filled the car like a secret waiting to be told. Inside the car, the world outside blurred into streaks of passing color. Naomi traced the edge of her seatbelt, unsure how to start a conversation with a man who seemed to carry more silence than words. Malcolm asked where she lived, his voice low, careful, almost afraid of saying too much. She pointed out the window, and for a few blocks, they rode without speaking. The hum of the tires and faint sound of jazz from the radio became their only dialogue. When he dropped her off, she turned to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. He smiled. That quiet kind of smile that says, "I see you," then drove away before she could reply. Ava noticed the shift first. "You're smiling again?" she teased, leaning against the diner counter as Naomi refilled the sugar jars. Naomi rolled her eyes, but a tiny laugh escaped before she could stop it. She hadn't realized until now that her smile had been missing. Maybe it wasn't about a man. Maybe it was about being reminded she still mattered. Still visible. Still alive beyond survival. But Ava grinned, knowing. "Whoever he is," she said, "don't let your fear talk louder than your hope." Naomi didn't answer, but her hand brushed over her pocket, where the napkin still rested, folded and untouched. That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She sat by her small window, the city lights painting her face in gold and shadow. Jalen slept peacefully on the couch beside her, one small hand clutching his stuffed lion. Naomi's gaze drifted to the folded napkin on the table, the words replaying in her mind. Somewhere across town, Malcolm sat in his bare apartment, staring at the same rain, wondering why a woman behind a diner counter made him feel like he still had something worth offering. Two souls in different rooms, breathing the same quiet loneliness, unaware that life had just begun to stitch their stories together. Naomi found herself looking for Malcolm every morning, even when she pretended not to. The diner felt different when he wasn't there. Too quiet. Too empty. One morning, he returned, not to sit, but to help. He fixed the flickering light above the counter, the one that had buzzed for weeks. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, unsure whether to be grateful or guarded. "Maybe I needed to," he replied. There was no charm in his voice, no pretense, just truth. Simple and disarming. The wall she'd built to protect her heart cracked, if only slightly. But cracks can be dangerous. They let in both light and pain. Later that day, Naomi found Malcolm sitting outside on the curb, eating a sandwich from a paper bag. No driver, no entourage, just a man who looked like Hyde learned how to live without titles. She joined him, uninvited but comfortable, handing him a napkin. They didn't talk about money or failure or dreams. Instead, they shared stories about childhood, favorite songs, and how both had learned to pretend they were fine when they weren't. It was a strange relief, being seen without judgment. But deep down, Naomi feared kindness had a price. She wasn't sure she could afford it. As days passed, rumors began to circle. Ava teased Naomi about her mystery man, while cow-workers whispered about the stranger who seemed too polished for their part of town. Naomi brushed it off. But insecurity crept in. What if he saw her life and realized it was too small, too ordinary? That evening, when Malcolm offered to walk her home, she hesitated. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he replied. "But maybe I want to." It was the simplest line, yet it settled in her chest like a promise she didn't know how to trust. When Naomi reached her door, Jalen was already waiting, his small face pressed against the window. "Who was that, Mama?" he asked once she came inside. Naomi smiled faintly. "Just a friend." But as she tucked him into bed later, she couldn't shake the thought. Just a friend shouldn't make her heart beat this fast. Across town, Malcolm lay awake too, staring at his ceiling, wondering how something so simple as a shared walk could feel like forgiveness. Neither knew that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes softly, through the cracks of everyday kindness. The next day, Malcolm didn't show up. Naomi tried to pretend she didn't notice, but the hours stretched too long. When he finally appeared, his expression was distant, weighed down. "I saw someone today," he murmured. "Someone from my old life." The pain in his eyes was raw, unguarded. He told her about the company he lost, the betrayal that stripped him of everything he'd built. For a moment she saw not a man who fell, but one who was still trying to stand. Without thinking, Naomi reached across the counter and touched his hand. "We all lose something," she whispered. "But we're not what we lost." Spring began to soften the air, and with it came small mercies. The diner's windows stayed open longer, sunlight spilling across the booths. Naomi laughed more now, small, unguarded moments that surprised even her. Malcolm had started coming by in the evenings, not for coffee, but for company. He'd help her close up, mopping floors or stacking chairs without being asked. They talked about little things, childhood dreams, favorite movies, the comfort of music that knew your sadness. Somewhere between those quiet talks and easy silences, Naomi realized she no longer felt alone. But that kind of closeness terrified her. It meant she had something to lose again. One night, Naomi found herself painting again. She hadn't touched a brush in years, not since her husband left. The colors felt strange beneath her fingers. Blue for memory, red for hope. She painted what she couldn't say: a diner window, a man in the rain, a boy sleeping in warm light. When she finished, she stared at it for a long time, realizing she'd painted Malcolm without meaning to. It scared her. How easily he had found a place in her heart. But when Jalen woke and looked at the canvas, he grinned. "He looks like the man who makes you smile," he said. And she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Malcolm stopped by the next morning, carrying a small potted plant. "For your window," he said, placing it gently on the counter. Naomi blinked, touched by the simplicity of the gesture. "You think I can keep something alive," she teased. He smiled. "You already do." The words lingered, not as flattery, but as truth. For the first time, she let herself look at him, really look, and saw not the man who'd lost everything, but the man still trying. That evening, she took the plant home and placed it beside her painting. Growth, it seemed, was finding its way back to both of them. Later that week, Malcolm offered to pick Jalen up from school while Naomi worked late. She hesitated, but Jalen's excitement made the choice for her. When they arrived at the park afterward, Malcolm watched the boy race across the playground, laughter echoing in the air. For a moment, something inside him softened. A memory of what life used to feel like before ambition consumed it. When Naomi arrived to meet them, the sight stopped her cold. Her son laughing freely, and Malcolm kneeling to tie his shoe, sunlight hallowing them both. It was the picture of peace she'd forgotten existed. That night, Naomi invited Malcolm in for dinner. The apartment was small, the table worn, but it felt full of laughter, of stories, of something new and fragile. Jalen insisted Malcolm say grace, and his quiet, steady voice filled the room. Afterward, when Jalen fell asleep, they sat together on the couch. "I didn't think I'd ever fit anywhere again," Malcolm admitted. Naomi looked at him, her voice soft. "Maybe you don't have to fit. Maybe you just have to belong." Outside, the city lights shimmered like promises waiting to be kept. The warmth that had quietly bloomed between Naomi and Malcolm began to feel like home. But peace, she learned, was fragile. One evening, as she wiped down the diner tables, a tall man stepped through the door, her ex-husband, Darius. His voice carried that same slick confidence that once made her believe he'd never leave. "You're hard to find," he said, eyes darting around until they landed on Jalen's photo taped to the wall. Naomi's stomach tightened. "What do you want?" she asked. "To see my son," he replied simply. The words sounded innocent, but his smirk told another story. She didn't see Malcolm walk in behind him, but when she did, she felt the past and present collide like thunder. After Darius left, Naomi sat in silence. The world she'd worked so hard to rebuild suddenly felt fragile again. Malcolm lingered near the counter, unsure whether to speak. "He hurt you," he said finally. It wasn't a question. Naomi nodded, tears she refused to shed glinting in her eyes. "He wants Jalen," she whispered. "Not out of love, out of control." Malcolm wanted to promise he'd protect her, but he knew that wasn't his right. All he could offer was presence, steady, quiet, and real. And sometimes that was enough. Meanwhile, Malcolm's past began to resurface too. A text message blinked across his cracked phone screen. "We need to talk, Elias," the man who'd betrayed him. The one who took his company and reputation. Meeting him again wasn't a choice. It was unfinished business. Elias offered him a proposal, a partnership that could restore his fortune, but at a price that reeked of pride. Malcolm listened quietly, the sound of his own heartbeat louder than the words. As he left the sleek downtown office, his reflection in the glass felt like a stranger, a man caught between the life he lost and the life he was just beginning to love. Naomi tried to stay strong, but fear found its way into her sleep. Jalen's laughter grew quieter at home, as if he sensed the tension. When Malcolm visited, she kept things light, avoiding talk of Darius or the custody papers now resting on her table. But Malcolm saw through her silence. "You don't have to do this alone," he said one evening. Voice steady but soft. "I've done everything alone," she replied. The words came out sharper than she intended. He didn't flinch, only nodded slowly, eyes full of understanding. In that quiet, she realized love sometimes meant letting someone stand beside you, even when the world felt unsafe. Days later, Naomi's fears came true. A court notice arrived. Darius was filing for partial custody. She sat on the floor, papers scattered, heart pounding. Malcolm came by after hearing from Ava. He knelt beside her, picking up one of the pages. "You'll fight this," he said firmly. "Well, fight this." The word we echoed louder than anything else. For the first time, Naomi didn't argue. She leaned against him, tears finally falling, unhidden and unashamed. It wasn't a promise of easy days ahead, but it was the beginning of facing them together. The next few weeks blurred into exhaustion. Between work, court dates, and sleepless nights, Naomi moved like someone balancing on thin ice. Malcolm was always there. Rides to the courthouse, dinners she didn't have to cook. But lately, his mind seemed elsewhere. He stared too long at his phone, took calls he didn't explain. One evening, she caught him standing outside the diner, arguing quietly with someone over the line. When she asked, he said, "It's nothing, just business." But something in his eyes told her otherwise. That word, business, had already cost him everything once. And now she feared it might cost them too. Malcolm didn't tell Naomi about the meeting with Elias, the deal that promised a way back into the tech world. It wasn't greed that tempted him. It was shame. He wanted to prove he could still be the man he once was, maybe even someone Naomi deserved. But secrets have a way of surfacing. One afternoon, Naomi stopped by his apartment with lunch and found the contract on his desk. Her hands trembled as she read the first line. Elias's name printed bold at the top. When Malcolm returned, her voice was steady, but her eyes were full of hurt. "You said you were done with that life." His silence answered for him. The argument that followed wasn't loud. It was heartbreak quiet. Naomi's words came slow and sharp, like glass carefully breaking. "You lied to me," she whispered. "You talk about rebuilding, but you're still chasing what destroyed you." Malcolm's voice cracked. "I was trying to give you more." "I never asked for more," she said, eyes wet but unflinching. "I just wanted real." For a long time, neither moved. The space between them felt wide as an ocean, filled with everything unsaid. When he reached for her hand, she stepped back. Some distances, she realized, can't be crossed by apologies alone. Naomi threw herself into work, each coffee poured and table wiped, a small attempt to quiet her heart. Malcolm stopped coming by. The booth where he used to sit stayed empty, its silence louder than any argument. Ava noticed the difference but didn't push. She just hugged Naomi a little tighter when her eyes looked too tired. At home, Jalen asked when Mr. Malcolm was coming back. Naomi didn't answer. Instead, she sat beside him, pretending to watch cartoons while her mind drifted to the echo of a voice that used to make the world feel softer. Across town, Malcolm sat alone in his car outside Elias's office. Contract unsigned on the passenger seat. He had everything to gain if he said yes: money, reputation, status. Yet all he could think about was Naomi's voice saying, "I just wanted real." The words were played like a prayer and a warning. For the first time, he realized that redemption wasn't something you could buy back. It had to be lived. Slowly, he tore the contract in half, the sound echoing louder than thunder in his chest. When the papers fell to the floor, he felt lighter, but also completely alone. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between Naomi and Malcolm stretched like unspoken sorrow. Life went on. Bills paid. Shifts worked. Jalen's laughter returning, little by little. Yet something in her chest remained hollow, like a song missing its final note. Then, one morning, she found a small package by her apartment door. Inside was the plant Malcolm had once given her, now thriving and full of green, with a note tied to its stem. "You were right. Belonging isn't about what we build. It's about who we build with." Naomi read the words twice before pressing the note to her heart. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope. That evening, Naomi walked to the park where Jalen played, her heart beating with quiet purpose. She wasn't sure what she hoped to find. Forgiveness, closure, maybe both. She sat on the same bench where she and Malcolm once watched Jalen laugh. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of rain. When she looked up, he was there, standing a few yards away, hesitant as ever. "I didn't sign it," he said softly. I walked away. Naomi's eyes welled up, the tension of weeks melting into quiet relief. She didn't move toward him. Not yet, but her heart did. They walked together slowly, words hesitant but true. Malcolm told her everything. The offer, the temptation, the fear of not being enough. Naomi listened, quiet and still, letting honesty fill the spaces where pride once lived. "I didn't want to lose you," he said. "Then don't," she whispered. The simplicity of it disarmed him. It wasn't a grand speech, just truth wrapped in grace. Jalen's laughter echoed in the distance, grounding them both. The moment felt fragile, yet certain. Two people learning to love, not through perfection but through forgiveness. Weeks later, the custody hearing finally arrived. Naomi sat nervously, hands gripping the edge of her seat, as the judge read through the case. Darius spoke with rehearsed charm, but even his polished words couldn't hide the truth. He wasn't there for Jalen, only for control. When Naomi spoke, her voice shook at first, then grew stronger. "I can't give him everything," she said, "but I give him love and peace and safety. That's more than money ever bought." In the quiet that followed, even Darius couldn't meet her eyes. The judge ruled in her favor. For the first time in years, Naomi felt like she had truly won. That night, the three of them, Naomi, Malcolm, and Jalen, sat outside the diner under a sky stitched with stars. The open sign flickered above, but the world felt closed to everything except this quiet moment. Naomi leaned into Malcolm's shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to think I had nothing," she said. "But you found me when I didn't even know how to look." Malcolm smiled, eyes reflecting the neon glow. "Maybe we both found what we needed," he said. Jalen yawned, resting his head on Naomi's lap. The city hummed softly around them. Alive, forgiving, endless. Love, she realized, wasn't about what they'd lost. It was about what they'd chosen to rebuild.